Yeah. Good evening, Patriots. Good evening, citizens. Here we are once again. Bit of a blemish just appeared there, just out of the second. What can I do? What can I do? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Hope you had a blessed and wonderful day. Lots going on in the background. Our lockdown has been extended to May the 4th, as I'm sure you're pretty much all well aware. Live chat, and for the members already sitting in the audience, thank you very much for joining us. Quick shout out to the live chat. We have Rising Gale, Mary's Board, Tom Foran, Colette Dunn, Rose White, the Mad Irishman, Tom Foran, Colette Dunn, we've already said, Cynthia Kading, and Gail Marie. Plenty more joining us as the room fills up. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get started and before I introduce my next guest, delighted to have her on board. Please don't forget, as I always do and quite encourage you, don't forget, press the like button, press the subscription button, and press the share. How are you? Sharmuck66, Keith Keegan. Now, I know there's a bit of a clash on times between myself and Jenna. Apparently, Gemma's on streaming. You're more than welcome to hop in between. But I think you'll find, even on review and on reflection after this broadcast, this will be an essential listening for yourself and for your own information. Paul Pugh, so very sorry to hear that. I'll keep your father in my prayers. I hope there's good recovery. Please look for alternative. I'll keep you in my prayers. Absolutely. As the room still fills up, and keep you all on board. So before I get started, please don't forget, press the like button, press the subscription and the share. If you could, please brighten my Northern Star. Please consider becoming a member on the Gran Torino Experience, as we like to call it here on the Grandstreams. Consider becoming a member. Just click the join button here, click down below. And if you could, I know in these desperate times, but please consider a cup of coffee a month with the list of options in there, and with the other payment systems that we have linked in the description box. Big shout out there. Link to the merchandise store as well. It's the new media. It's the new platform. It's how we do it. Got to keep the ship afloat. So without further ado, my next guest, Fiona Flanagan, is a Twitter handle that I've been following since I first became aware of her. I think earlier on at the start of this year, or maybe even before Christmas. A very strong advocate in the Patriot movement as well. But we had a great conversation yesterday, and I got to know a little bit more about Fiona and herself. But with that said, being given in the times that we are in, we're going to let Fiona introduce herself and what we're going to get into and what I want to discuss. And I'll bring to your attention SGT's report a while ago, there about 4 weeks ago, about supply chain crisis or supply chain shock. No matter what's going on with the pandemic, the lockdown situation, the lockdown and the global lockdown is going to have consequences. And I think it's imperative that we all get a kind of a grasp on it. And this will be what I would consider a quick deep dive or a quick plot into what the workings and the inner workings are of supply chain. Many of us will be quite well aware of it, but the implications not only on a global scale, but also how it pertains to how it might affect us going forward in the next couple of months, weeks, maybe even for the rest of the year, as the global economy tries and comes to terms with the impending depression. We're already in recession, whether we like to understand it or not. But for shelves and restocking and supply chain mechanisms, I want to bring in Fiona now, and we will get started on tonight's discussion. Fiona, good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. How are you?
I'm not too bad today, Rowan. It's been a lovely sunny day, so I have enjoyed that with my family. It's been great. But thank you for having me on.
You're fantastic. I want to get a quick shout out from live chat just to check. Quick sound check for my microphone and a quick sound check for Marie's. We're still getting a little bit of disturbance from movement, but I think it's still essential. So we are.
I'm not moving. I promise.
Stand still, Fiona. Stand
I'm
still.
frozen on the spot, literally.
Okay, fantastic. We've got 5x5s coming in from Terence F88. Shamrock 1966 says hello, Fiona. Donald Casey 5x5. Max Strax, Rising Gale in the house. So just to give you a brief breakdown of the format here, when Fiona gets started into here, I'm going to jump into the live chat and I'll jump in and out in between the screen. But in essence, I'm going to let Fiona take over and run us through what we need to be aware of, certain terminologies, what we could potentially expect, and what we assuredly can expect with the pause on the global supply chain. Fiona, take it away, chicken.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you, whoever's here, for all your attention. And I have a background in economics, so it's not just off the cuff. My sort of speciality was development, economic development, from the Vietnamese perspective especially, but I was very interested in the IMF and the World Bank and how they were lending into developing countries and basically stringing them with debt and asset stripping them. So that was a key concern of mine as I was teaching. But today, if it's okay, I'd like to start by talking about the central banking system, and so we can kind of anchor ourselves to understand a little bit of why we are as precarious as we are, and why even before the corona crisis began, the world economy was perched on the edge of a recession, a very deep recession. Now, I know you will say that economists have predicted, 8 out of the last 4 recessions, for example, and that's what we're always calling them, and we never get them right. But I honestly believe, just looking at the data, that things were not strong. The fundamentals weren't there in the global economy. And indeed, the coronavirus, in many ways, is the perfect crisis to bring everything to a head. And it's almost to force a collapse. So if we can start maybe with the central banking system. And we know that the world is run by a chain of central banks, the Federal Reserve Bank being, I would say, the most important among them, probably followed closely by the European Central Bank. They all interconnect with the central banks throughout the world and report into the Bank of International Settlements, which is a bank located in Switzerland. Each central banking head, or their chief economists, or whoever they choose, would go to Switzerland. I think it's probably once every couple of months, to discuss monetary responses, and that is monetary policy, the tools that the central banks use to navigate the economic conditions globally, both globally and domestically. And you probably know now, with the globalized environment in which we live, that really monetary policy mostly has a global angle to it, and it's almost like domestic policy is sacrificed for the global good. Okay, so they will meet in the Bank of International Settlements and then implement the policy responses that are convenient or that are required at the time. Now, the key thing to know about the central banks is that they are private. They are privately owned. They are not public, and they are not part of the government. So that's a general misconception that was out there. And I must confess, I believed that to be the case myself originally. But no, the Federal Reserve, for example, and I will anchor on that because it's the central bank I know most about. It is indeed privately owned. So it's not federal, and it has questionable reserves. In fact, it hasn't actually had a comprehensive audit done on it. Now, the thing about the central banks is they issue currencies into their economies as debt. So the government debt is financialized. So, for example, if the government wants to undertake any expenditure, it needs to borrow over and above the tax revenue that it receives from its citizenry. It will borrow from the central bank at interest. So think about it. Currency is effectively issued as debt into the economy. It is issued as debt plus interest. So at any one time, money is owed back into the central banks in excess of that which was loaned out to begin with, if you see what I mean, because the interest component means you owe more back in than was lent out.
On compound interest as well, Fiona, yeah?
Oh, yes. I mean, that is the most vicious instrument of all, is compound interest. It is absolutely, I hate to use the word, but I believe it's diabolical. And I believe that is why the global economy, for starters, and also individuals within the economies, are debt slaves. We are hamstrung with debt on account of compound interest. But let's go back to the government. So the governments have to borrow money at interest in order to finance any expenditure over and above tax revenues. That is not necessary. That was put into place with the Central Bank of England, first of all, and I believe that that was set up in the 1600s.
Yeah.
And when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, I believe it was 1913, and it hasn't been changed since then, that enabled the Federal Reserve Bank to issue currency and for the government to borrow from it
Yes.
at interest. Lincoln was assassinated, and on account of the fact that he wanted to generate his own greenbacks, he wanted to take control of the issuance of currency back to the US Treasury itself. Okay, so to completely avoid the need for the central bank to be involved in this process at all. So, you know, economically, there is no reason for the central bank to do this. Okay, governments, I believe, should have the power to issue their own currency free from debt for the good of their economies, to invest in the goods and services that their economies need, okay, which will not be inflationary, providing those goods and services are accommodative to the money. So in other words, they're not over generating currency. In other words, too much currency chasing after too few goods and services, which would be inflationary. So as long as the currency in circulation directly supports the amount of goods and services being produced, you should be able to serve the needs of your people, as opposed to what we're doing now, which is serving the central banks and debt usury. Yeah, if you see what I mean. So the governments are in debt, and therefore the government debt is secured on the taxes of the citizens. So this is why when we're born into an economy, we're born with a certain burden of debt per capita already that is owed back to the banking system on our behalf.
And that contract or that commodity is your birth cert, Fiona. Not to distract too much from your thing, but
yeah, no. Ask away. Yes, that's effectively we are a commodity. This is what we are. We are a unit of production, which is born into the country in which we live. And yes, that is we are to service that debt. So that kind of helps you understand why, bless them, the elderly are in a godless society in which we live now. We regard individuals as units of production with productive value, and therefore when you get to retirement you are no longer producing. So therefore you are no longer adding value into the economy. You are a drain on the pension, unfunded pension liabilities that are out there, which is why you could say that, looking at it purely economically, not morally or ethically, but the elderly are a liability. And I differentiate that because economics has now divorced itself from ethics. It used to be a branch of moral philosophy, but now when it became mathematicized and utility maximized, it became more hedonistic. So everyone is in pursuit of their own self-gratification based upon their constraints, and to hell with everyone else. And the magical hand waves, and therefore if we all behave like this, somehow magically the economy works out and produces the exact right amount of goods and services to service all our needs, because we're all out there maximizing our utilities.
Just as a quick aside, Fiona, sorry. Yeah. It seems now that the healthcare system is also being put under that philosophy as well now, with the distribution of either ventilators or DNS or DNR certificates and all that. But I don't want to branch off into that there. But that ethos is creeping into healthcare.
Yes, absolutely. It will. And, it'll be very convenient for, I'm not saying the healthcare professionals, because I have no doubt they are distraught having to make these sorts of decisions. But the constraints that have been imposed upon them, in my view, are completely unnecessary. Okay. And I mean, that then, as you say, takes us into a wider conversation about how taxpayers' revenue is spent, what it's wasted on, what it should be spent, opportunity cost, etc. And the debt, the interest that we're serving on the debt that we incurred, that we should have never incurred as this country way back in 2008. So, that's a complete mess that we could be disentangled, on another occasion. But yes, you're absolutely right. So so hopefully, to get back to my story, you can see why, governments are in such debt to the central banks. Each one of us within our economies, on the average, are in debt. I'm not talking about those lucky enough to own their properties or not to have mortgages, etc. But on the average, we are all in debt to a certain degree. So that post 2008, just to say, the global economy never really recovered. I know we have been fed some sort of favorable economic data out of the US, Rowan, and Trump has gone on about the stock market. It's never been higher, it's never been better. But sadly, my view on this is that it was almost, he was pumping additional air into an already inflated bubble. Because if you look at what happened sort of post-Obama, what you're getting is that the stock market is diverging even further from the real economy. And when I say the real economy, I mean the actual physical goods and services that we produce within an economy and trade, and produce and consume amongst ourselves, and the financial economy. Yeah. Which means that somebody's just, Rowan, can you hear me? Because somebody just texted me and said that I'm streaming. Am I okay? Yeah.
You're fine. Keep going, Fiona. Keep going. I'll let you know you're perfect. Keep going.
Right. So what I'm saying is that the response of the central banks to the 2008 crisis, quantitative easing, as you've discussed yourself, which is effectively money printing, has made financial assets diverge completely from real assets. Okay, so when I talk about real assets, I mean real goods, tangible goods and services that we need to consume. Whereas financial assets, I'm talking about equities, I'm talking about bonds, I'm talking about derivatives, etc. The value of both those aspects of the economy has diverged. So as the stock market has risen, the real economy growth hasn't risen. And that means that real investment hasn't been driving real growth, if you understand what I'm saying. Absolutely, so therefore, we were in this sort of an unreal type of bubble situation. And what Trump did, and I want to make it clear, I'm not anti-Trump. I'm actually quite apolitical, because I just look upon these leaders as what they do as opposed to what they say they're going to do. Trump talks a good game, and I really like his pro-life stance. So don't hassle. I don't want to get harangued for this.
Don't be silly.
But what he did was he gave tax cuts to the rich, to the corporations. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Am I still there? Yeah. They then invested this into stock buybacks, as opposed to investing in their productive capacity. So what we were getting through the Trump era, through his presidency, again, was more froth on the already sort of frothing bubbles, if you see what I mean. Absolutely. So the stock, So now when the shock hit, the pandemic came, at the time it came, the stock market then had its crash. I mean, I say crash advisedly, because I believe personally there's a bit of a plunge protection team going on there to try and sort of put floors on the stock market in the US especially, so that it doesn't literally sort of spiral out of control. But that to me was poised, ready to happen, and the coronavirus just tipped it over. Now, economists will blame the coronavirus, and some of them might even say, actually, the fundamentals weren't there to begin with. But notwithstanding, we are now seeing the situation unravel, and it's going to be very difficult for the US, especially because the US people have a lot of their money tied up in the stock market from their 401ks, whereas in the UK and Ireland, most people have their money in their housing stock. So obviously we will be more interested in what happens to house prices going forward than necessarily the US would, although they would be, obviously interested in that too. So I hope I'm kind of giving you a sense of the fundamentals weren't very strong. We were very much indebted. Economies were teetering on the brink. The coronavirus has pushed this over the edge. So we are now stumbling. And on top of that, okay, the responses. Now, I'm going to talk about responses at a high level first, if that's okay, and then bring it down into the kind of the country level. The response of the Federal Reserve Bank right now is unprecedented.
Yeah.
It has basically said, it has said it will do whatever it takes to try and shore up the US and global economy, actually. So what it's doing is it's bailing out hedge funds, it's bailing out junk bonds, it's buying junk bonds, it's buying nearly every single piece of debt it can get its hands on.
Yeah.
It's pumping trillions into the investment banks. So it's not directly buying stocks. So it won't say, oh, that you can't say the Federal Reserve is directly buying equities, because it's not technically. But what it's doing is, by putting money into the investment banks, i.e. through its reserves that they hold with the central banking system, the investment banks are therefore taking that money and then investing that in the stock market. Which is why you saw, Rowan, yesterday, which I found incredible, you found a stock market increase on the back of 6.6 million job loss in the US.
That might tie in with the coronavirus bonds that they're creating as well. They're also speculating on this pandemic as well.
Yeah. And that's a whole nother story. I became aware of those. But all to say is that it doesn't make sense to me unless there's something going on behind the scenes. And to finish with this story, I just want to differentiate between two typical players in the stock market. So you would have your trader type people who are trading on a daily basis, and they're trying to sort of buy low, sell high, and sort of ride the volatility waves in the stock market. They're more short-termers. Then you have the investment people, the pension funds, some hedge funds, probably not all, who would have a longer term view. And they would therefore take longer term positions in stock indexes or particular company equities. And they wouldn't be buying and selling in and out on a daily basis. So for my mind, the activity you're seeing now is of the former. It's the trader type, the ones who are trying to play the upswings, the dead cat bounces, if you like, and manage through that. So therefore, my assessment of this is what you're going to see is a lot of volatility in the stock market, but I believe the trend will be downwards. I may be wrong. I'm not saying this, with any degree of certainty. This is my speculation. I haven't run in a model.
Sorry, Fiona, just to add there, they're already trying to stop short selling and bar it and stop short selling, because, as you say, it is going to be a downward trend.
Yeah, that's what I believe. So the sort of the sentiment is very, very precarious, and therefore, when you sort of look upon this, you could actually say that the economy is in effect frozen in time. Think about it that way, because there is no money velocity. Money is not circulating around. Just think of what any individual is purchasing on a day-to-day basis. I mean, when even me, when I go into shops, I'm prevented from buying certain goods and services which are not deemed to be essential. Yeah, so there is no money velocity, which means you can imagine that GDP will already significantly contract. And the IMF has just come out and said that this pandemic is going to unleash the worst recession since the Great Depression. And full disclosure, I'm not a fan of the IMF, because they are tied very much to the United Nations and the World Bank. And as you know, their policies have been to indebt the developing world and have them indebted in US dollars, which is the world's reserve currency, while they implement neoliberal economic policies which impoverish their people and increases inequality in their countries. So I am not a fan of the IMF, but this is what they are saying.
Myself, Fiona, and also leaves us open to China buying up distressed debts as well. We are in a very precarious position in time economically.
Oh yeah. And I mean, back to the Fed, you know, as I said, because it's the one I have studied the most. If the Fed is buying up the amount of debt it's buying now, and my understanding is it's not taking ownership stakes in these companies yet, but fundamentally, it has put the US economy is on life support. And I say that advisedly. I'm not just throwing that out there. So therefore, what you will have is in effect, a nationalization of certain industries. Now, I know that there have been reports of the Federal Reserve being taken over by the US government. I have yet to believe that, but what I would concede is that there would be certainly a relationship there between the two, or a partnership whereby the Federal Reserve would leverage or facilitate the US government leveraging, borrowing money in order to bail out industries that it considers to be strategic in the long term. So what we will end up with, I believe, and I worry about, is yet again the Fed, in corroboration with the US government, betting on or taking a pick on who gets saved and who crashes. And therefore, the complexion of the US economy in terms of its industries that survive may be very, very different down the line, down the pipe, after this coronavirus pandemic has played out, if indeed it ever plays out. So, and finally, Rowan, on the Fed, I believe, my understanding is that it's also dollarizing other central banks throughout the world, funneling money to them to facilitate whatever they need to do into their own economies to sort of ease the pain or prop it up or provide some relief. So this, at the moment, is creating artificial demand for the US dollar, because it is still the world's reserve currency. It is in effect the petrodollar. But my concern is down the line that will perhaps precipitate a US dollar collapse. Yeah. Now, I can't elaborate on that too much at this point. I need to think more deeply about it. But obviously, if you're spraying dollars around the world, obviously the artificial demand is keeping the currency value reasonably strong against other currencies. I've just taken a look today. My worry is on developing currencies in developing economies will be under tremendous pressure. Yeah, because of their supply problems. But they still have to facilitate debt servicing in US dollars. And that is going to crucify them. It really is. And that's what I worry about. But, but that's the question that will emerge. And I'm sure you will have many discussions about it with your guests as to how this currency situation is going to play out. You and I probably both agree that the aim is a one world currency. However they structure it, however it is decided to be structured, digitized, possibly set against a basket of currencies, the US dollar being weighted in there, as well as the Chinese yuan. That I can't say with certainty, but that's what I suspect may happen. If there is a US dollar collapse, there will need to be a global reset against some sort of predetermined digital global currency.
Sorry, Fiona, quick question. Do you foresee, or do you think there's any possibility of a debt jubilee that's happened throughout time in various other crisis situations? Do you think that's possible?
I do think it's possible, Rowan, and that's an interesting one. It's interesting that you've asked me. Yes, I do. To what extent, I cannot possibly say, but I do think that some sort of sweetener may very well be offered to people. Some sort of debt write-off on some sort of debt servicing that they need to complete. But there's a cost and a benefit to everything. That will be a benefit, but there will be conditionality to that. And the conditionality, my concern, will ultimately cost more than the benefit that the write-off had given us.
I agree.
So yes, you're absolutely right. It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't put it past me if they do write off some debt in order to sort of kickstart consumption again, because people will be under huge strain and stress. Poverty will, skyrocket. We haven't even gone into that. And yes, some sort of jubilee may very well be an absolute necessity. But for me, the key issue always is the function of the central bank.
Yeah.
And if they are persisting in issuing their currency into the economy as debt, then ultimately we are no better off, in the long term than we are now. We may get some reprieve, but we will still become indebted in the future.
I agree.
Unless there's a complete overhaul of how money is created and how governments take control of that back from the central banks, there will be no long-term reprieve, I don't think.
How do you grade our government on the possibility of that as it stands now with the caretaker government and whatever entity they bring in after that?
Here,
Yeah.
in this country, you mean?
Yeah.
Listen, in terms of what, debt relief or
even the debt jubilee, but they're like the management of the economy is such like that. I mean, they're and I don't want to drag us away from your instruction, but their main
no, that's okay.
their main thing of or weapon of choice was to bring in as many people as possible to create more tax drones that would just perpetuate the GDP system. But that's just been utterly crippled now with the coronavirus.
Oh yeah, completely. And I struggled, okay, because I was trying to look at the composition of the Irish economy. And I've had many discussions with other economists actually on this as to where are the industries of growth in the future. So where will you be earning the higher salaries? Or are we just going to consign ourselves to a polarized economy where you have a lot of lower skilled, and I say that advisedly, that's the right terminology to use, sort of lower skilled workers competing wages down in those sectors, and then you have a very, very small higher skilled sector, which would be, I guess, tech, pharma, and some banking. So that of itself, those higher skilled sectors which would command higher wages would not be enough to propel economic growth forward at the rate we need it, especially when there's downward pressure on wages in the lower skilled sectors due to immigration, population growth, etc. So my concern is that there would be a hollowing out of the middle class in Ireland, and you would end up with further polarization of wages with sort of nothing in between. You would have the very high end wages and then very low end wages with something hollow in the middle. And
that's always been one of the plans. I presume that's always been one of the plans was to cripple the middle class and whatever that is, because middle class people are too independent, they're too free thinkers, because they're capable enough, or they're comfortable enough to put aside monies and to be free thinkers and to forward plan for themselves. Where if you're totally reliant on the government as a lower wage earner and you're milking the cream as a higher wage earner, there is no pushback from the middle class.
Yeah, absolutely. That I agree fully with that. And as well, I'm sure you've spoken about this with your other guests too, but I believe that there will be a global push to introduce a universal basic income, because once the economic fallout from this crisis propagates through, people will be destitute. They will absolutely be destitute. And the benevolent nanny state will then come in and say, oh yes, well, here is a universal basic income that we will all command, we all have a right to, but that will still consign people to a certain lower standard of living. So we'll all be equally poor, as opposed to allowing people sort of rise and educate themselves or train themselves and be entrepreneurial, take risks, set up businesses. All of that, I think, will be eliminated, or as good as eliminated. And you will have that dependency culture on this universal basic income, with a very, very small percentage of people managing to get themselves out of that.
Yeah.
And that's not good. I mean, to me, I mean, I know there would be a lot of sort of socialist, diehard socialists out there who think, oh, yeah, that's great. You know, that's what we all should have. But I am dead set against that, because I firmly believe we've all got different skills and abilities and talents. We should all be encouraged to flourish and do whatever we can do to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
So to force us down on the lowest common denominator basic income, which, let me tell you, Rowan, is not going to be able to afford you or us a great standard of living in any case. That, to me, that's communist socialism at its worst.
I concur. I completely agree. But I mean, at the same time, we're not polishing a bit of despair on it, but it's important for people to prep.
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
it's important for people to prep and be aware of it, because there's various contingency plans you can make your own. I can't emphasize enough starting your own supply chain now. Start growing vegetables. Smaller the better, whatever you want. Just get into the habit of being self-sufficient for a time and pass it on. Universal basic instinct, I'm totally against as well. But I'm not going to try and base that on old technologies, because as markets, as we say, keep going down, older technologies like your iPhones, the older versions, they will have currency and they will have a value, and they will be pumped into the market as well. So that philosophy was put out by Peter Schiff a long time ago, that using downward shortfalling and short sellings of old technology, people will be able to make money out of that. And that in essence would have been able to perpetuate UBI. But you're right, it's a complete path to serfdom.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And to me, anyway, I personally find that horrifying. And, you know, to be sort of suffocated by a situation like that. Because I just remember I was in Cuba way back in 1997, you know, when they opened it up to tourists at that point. Yeah. So I was in Varadero, and I remember visiting Havana, and I remember speaking to some of the locals, and they were telling me that they were trained. One guy was a trained engineer, but he said it was far more lucrative to him to try and sort of scratch an income in the tourist industries, where he may get some US dollars, as opposed to using his qualification in the domestic economy. He couldn't command the salary. So, you know, that is, to me, that's the worst situation that we could possibly find ourselves in, where our skills are not rewarded, because obviously we do respond to incentives, and that's how we get great inventions. That's how we have entrepreneurship. That's how we have risk taking.
Free thinkers, inspirational people that aspire to do different things. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and that needs to be encouraged, you know, and everyone. It's not, you know, I'm not a proponent of university for everyone either, because I actually think that was a really negative thing to have insisted upon. And I think it has done tremendous damage to the economy as a result, because we've all these, you know, nonsense degrees, underwater basket weaving, and they're useful for nothing. No, but I'm serious.
I never heard of that course before, but that's a fantastic analogy.
Yeah, but that's as much as it is. I mean, you come out of that, and you know, shoot me down if you want. But what are you good for? You may as well have learned a trade. There's no poor plumbers out there or electricians. Let me tell you.
But they're in that situation now. Now is the time. Now when it becomes a stark reality how fucking useless your humanities and all of that is, as it's going to become apparent. Having a trade now is worth more. You're a rock star if you're able to offer your labor for services that are going to be desperately needed.
Yes, absolutely. That's it. That's absolutely right. But if you want to now, I mean, so I've painted a pretty bleak picture. I have. I'm sorry, but
sorry, Fiona. I know you're going to go off on another projection. But there is hope. There is other ways. There's internal markets. You can reprint. We can withdraw from the EU. We can start printing our own currency. We can trade internally sockets, and we can encourage state spending on infrastructural projects and stuff like that.
Yes.
There are different ways.
Absolutely right. Yes, look, there is always a solution. Absolutely, where there's a will. But right now, with the goons we have in government, the globalist puppets who are under the control of EU/UN forces, my read of it, and this is just my opinion, is that they're merely responding to instructions that they are receiving down upon them. Notably, if you'll remember when our dear leader was in New York, was it New Washington rather,
Yeah.
on St. Patrick's weekend. Remember, he was sitting beside Trump,
Yeah.
and Trump said, "Oh, he knows what he has to do." And
The calm
Leo came
before the
back,
storm, as he
and
was
then
instructed to say as well.
yes, the same analogy. Come on, calm before the storm. So to me anyway, and I don't wish to be unkind, but he looked like a little schoolboy receiving his instructions, and then he came back to Ireland to execute them with a nice little speech about, be nice to your mummy and daddy. And then the country was in lockdown. So, bless them, but I really don't think our leaders have a backbone between them.
Not at all.
That situation just needs to change. But yes, to sort of I am being gloomy, but you're absolutely right. The plan is, I believe the plan is to impoverish us, and I won't put a finer point on that. Yes, absolutely, but that does not mean that will happen. This is where they want to take us, and I believe they have various different scenarios that will play out depending upon our reactions. Okay, so a lot does depend on how we in Ireland and globally respond to what's happening and what's being done. And what I fear right now is that people are still so frightened and horrified, going around in their hazmat suits. And I'm not downplaying their fear, because
No, not at all.
I
Yeah.
was really worried myself with the H1N1, the swine flu.
Yeah.
Years ago, I was in a terrible state. And I remember that. I was afraid to go out. So, as much as I say to people now, please don't be too afraid, take your precautions, do what you have to do. I was that person 10 years ago. So
Yeah.
I know what it's like. And people are absolutely terrified. But my fear is that once this fear kind of where it subsides a bit, and assuming we don't get other outbreaks, and that's not necessarily what I believe will happen in the future, but that's another story, then the economic fallout will become apparent. The distress that people are going through right now, and the money that they're being given will not be sufficient to help them, even get through the short term, never mind the medium term. I heard that I think there were about 15,000 applications into the Bank of Ireland to give mortgage holidays to mortgage holders. And of course that will help, but it won't stop the compounding.
No.
And it won't stop. These people will end up paying more in the long run than they would had they not
They'll have to give up the properties or give it up to a housing association on a 50-50 scheme just to remain in situ.
Yeah. So, that's the thing. But as you say, if we had a coherent, if we had a sensible, rational government who actually acted with the best interests of the Irish people in mind, this calamity, this crisis could be navigated through, and we could come out the other end. I do firmly believe that. So if you want to move on to, we can talk a bit about supply chains, or is there any other questions you have on what I've just said? Or
no, Fiona, I tell you what I'm going to do, and you're not that you're not going to hit me, but there's a big surge in the live chat there that want to know everything about you. Why haven't you got a website, and why aren't you on YouTube by yourself? So what I'm going to do is I want to tease it out, because I think we're coming up on 45 minutes. So what we might do for this last 10 minutes, and I'd like to book you back in again for Monday, if that's at all possible.
Oh, that's me. I'll be studying a whole weekend, Rowan. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is now, because this has been a nice little introduction to what we're speaking about, and there's quite a handful there for a lot of people to get their head on there as well. I'm not talking about the many great people in our live chat now, but some new to the parish, some new subscribers that are here now will be kind of coming familiar with this information now, or just getting into it now. And that your breakdown there and your complete such a fine breakdown of not only the Fed exchange, but a brief introduction to global economics. I mean, we didn't even touch supply chain or any of that. So what I'll do is I want to lead that off on Friday, and let us sit on with that, because that's been fantastic. Like I told you, we're coming up on an hour and we've barely even scratched the surface. So everybody in the live chat, if you could, before we sign off, Fiona, and people are going to say, "Oh, don't cut it off now." I think it's the perfect place to do it now. And then we'll spend a little bit more time. We will actually have maybe an hour and a half. We'll push that out now because people will see this and pay attention to this one now and be enthused enough to jump back in with us on Monday. But Fiona, where can people get a hold of you? Just on your Twitter handle as it stands?
Yeah, as it stands, I mean, I have considered, do you know what? I never thought I'd be doing this, Ron. And I'm very grateful to you for giving me the platform and for Gemma as well. I honestly never saw myself on this. I may do some YouTubing. I don't know. I really don't know. As I was reluctant.
How about we bring you in here on a regular slot, and then when you're ready to rock and roll, you can set up your own channel, jump it out. We'll push it out there because we don't really have alt media economics or economy. You know, we tend to just drift over to the United States, but it doesn't really pertain to what's happening here in Ireland. I think a voice like yours is sorely missed on all alternative media platforms.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do a regular slot. We could just do economics. Yeah, what's going on in Ireland and
that's all we do.
To the crisis and critique, you know, what's going on, what they're doing, etc. Because I'd be up for that.
That'd be amazing. I'd really appreciate it because everybody is just singing your praises and they're so eloquent, so erudite. As I was saying this morning, such a wealth of information that we haven't even barely touched the surface of, as I meant. So Fiona, at that stage, I'm going to say thanks very much for joining me. We look forward to same time Monday evening, 8 o'clock, if that's okay with you.
I won't be going out, that's for sure. I'm on lockdown, so you have me.
That's amazing. That's great. And the reason I'm leaving it that long is I'm going to sign off for the weekend as well. I'll be back Monday morning. I want to spend a bit of time. I want to switch off and decompress for the weekend and go a little bit dark. I may even turn my phone off. Being the weekend that is in Easter weekend, I'll be spending my time in meditation and contemplation and doing whatever we need to do on a personal term. So I'm actually going to disconnect from technology for the weekend. I'm actually going to switch my phone off and just remain incognito for the whole weekend. But I'll be back here 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, 9 a.m. Monday morning. Please live chat, please join me there on Monday morning. And please a big round of applause, please. I don't know if you can see the live chat, Fiona, from your end, but can we get a round of applause in the live chat, please, for Fiona? And thank her very much for joining us this evening. And if you have,
bless! Oh, I can see some. Oh yeah, that's nice. Thank you.
I think you're a star in the making, Fiona. It's just you're about to take off. Houston, we have ignition. Fiona,
I'm about to crash land, Rowan.
No, you're not. You're about to take off. Don't you worry about it, because you're a wealth and a stunning and a very well spoken. Really enjoyed speaking with you this evening, Fiona. And I mean, like with the rest of the guests, really looking forward to part 2 or our weekly, daily, night, whatever slot we can agree with. Is that okay, Fiona?
That is perfect. Thank you. And have a great weekend.
You too as well. Have a blessed weekend. And I'll see you on Monday. Take care.
Okay. Cheers. Bye.
Live chat there. I thought that was a bit fantastic. I will spend the Monday morning. I'll be in touch with Fiona and we will try and tweak her sound system a little bit and just get rid of some of the background noise and just get her set up properly. It was kind of a little bit of a rushed connection that we had, and so we didn't have time to do kind of a pre-test and all that. But I do think the information is very important. A lot of newbies, a lot of new people that won't be aware of this forward planning that we all need to start considering and start taking yesterday. I mean yesterday. Start planting seeds tomorrow, yesterday. And I mean seeds of thought, seeds to your nearest and dearest, seeds to all of your extended family as well and stuff like that. And start talking, get your communication line set up. Again, when this BS of lockdown and clampdown goes on, whichever way things go forward, we can't still be our own entities inside this market until whatever train of events may take us forward. But at least we will have, at the meantime, we'll have this platform here to congregate and come around and discuss these wide-ranging topics that we all need to become aware of. Hopefully, and I say not near in the near future, Fiona will have her own situation, and indeed she will take off like a rocket star, because I mean, how good was that brief introduction? Not that I say I couldn't, I wouldn't even dare attempt to try and do anything like that what Fiona's done. Okay, live chat, let's have a quick roll call and let's go into the weekend. And I will see you bright and early, boots polished, stilettos sharpened, everybody in tip-top shape, creases in shorts, creases and pleats in skirts, and we will rock again Monday morning. Quick roll call and then we'll sign off, and I will see you Monday morning. Have a great and blessed weekend. Terence F88 is from Anna 31, jumping straight over to John and Gemma. James Rockwell, we have Salty Dog. Thank you very much for all the kind words. Danny London 54. God bless Ireland. Bill, Sharon, Bill 61, Sharon 54 in Swords. Thanks for joining me, William and Sharon. We have Hounded It Down 60 and down. Richard Kelly 53. I'm not going to try and slow it down. I'll just grab what I can. We have Liam Fleming, West Cork. Evelyn Fagan, Tipperary 33. Kieran Heelan 44 in Limerick. Fintan O'Meara in the Republic of Cork. For Nothing is in Liverpool at 43. Happy Easter stuck in Iceland from KTMC. New 2020 34 in Castlelock, Dublin. I think I know who you are. Rose White is also in the house. Have a great weekend, Rose. Enjoy yourself. And James Rockwall, among many others. Noreen Flanagan, 50 in Tipperary. And that'll do us for this evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a fantastic roll call. Thank you for joining me in this for this episode of Grandstream, and I will see you all Monday morning. Have a great time. And please don't try and contact me because I am literally going to turn the phone off. Us.